Dr. Bob Arnot, the former chief medical correspondent for NBC and CBS News, and an award winning journalist to boot. You were with us in mid March, Doc. What surprised you most about what's happened with this since then?
Well, that really has become the greatest crisis perhaps in the last 100 years. It's unbelievable. As the president said the other day, more Americans are apt to die over the next month or so than have, in decades. So I just think the staggering force of this, it literally has been like a tsunami where people are playing on the beach, reading a book, and there's this giant 100-foot crushing wave headed towards them. I've been on the phone all day today and yesterday, last couple of days with hospitals in Boston, New Hampshire, New York City, trying to respond in terms of increasing the number of vents that they've been able to get there. And it's just completely beyond the imagination how sick people are and how many people are dying.
How do you rate the Trump administration's handling of this?
Well, it's really tough. I was thinking about this, Larry, that, there were a lot of miscues here. The Chinese missed it early on. The bureaucrats in Wuhan tried to cover it up. Then the Chinese didn't tell us. Then we had a lot of warning there. Then I think, there was even more warning with the Italians. The trouble is just gauging the enormity of this. Now, my friends will kill me for saying this, but I listen to these White House press conferences every day, and I would give the president's team very high marks. And I do think that the president gets a lot of credit for being, reasonably upbeat about this, and trying to keep the national mood up, even though this is a staggering capacity, catastrophe. Deborah Birx, I think, is fantastic. She's great in terms of the modeling. Anthony Fauci, I worked with since 1983 when I first started at CBS. So it's an all-star team, but as Fauci said, this is the nightmare scenario. The Ebolas and those hemorrhagic fevers, they kind of burn themselves out because people get too sick to travel. Here, we found people can travel completely asymptomatic. And it may be 25% of the infections that come from somebody who doesn't even know they're infected. So it is the nightmare scenario, but I think that it's important to become calm. And I got to tell you, I have never seen so much transparency in government. A question was asked one day, why did you shut down the United Kingdom? The next day they shut it down. There's a question about stuff, and I love the way that the administration is able to respond incredibly quickly. I think there'll be a lot of criticism for being late, but I do think that, day to day, I give them high marks for their responses.
How about the governors of states? How are they doing?
I think it's a mixed picture. I think some have been very reticent. Some states like Arizona really haven't, shut down at all yet, which may prove to be a mistake. Florida was a little bit late. I think our governor up here in Vermont's been very proactive. I think that Cuomo has done, a terrific job really pushing for these vents. I'm talking to the hospitals at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're begging for vents. We found, in fact, that there were missing and broken parts to the vents coming out of the stockpile. At least that's where we believe they came from. So I've been working to try to replace those parts, and they are desperate for these ventilators. They're down to just two or three. And what they were telling me the other day, Larry, is that in the last week, what you lost were, the old individuals who had risk factors who the flu might have killed. Tragic, but might have killed anyhow. Now you're looking at young people. And one of the most interesting things they said was that it's the younger people who are vaping, who are cigarette smoking, who are smoking marijuana, where it infects the alveolus, that little air sac there. That's where the virus attacks. And so the tragedy is going to be, the younger people who get this virus and then who die for it. I just did want to give one shout out here to Russia. I was really moved with that plane that they sent to the United States. We're talking about moving ventilators and respiratory therapists, from one sort of epicenter to the other. And I think that's going to happen between country and country to country. And I really think Russia has set the mark there by showing how, you move from one country to the other. And it was very touching. I really was very impressed.
You're a former colleague of Dr. Fauci. How would you rate his performance?
I would give Tony Fauci an A plus plus extra credit. because you see, there hasn't been good enough information in the model to really decide what's going on. I mean, they haven't known who's going to die. Like among the younger patients in London now, they found out that those on ventilators have a high BMI, meaning they're overweight. They have metabolic syndrome, which is sort of diabetes on steroids. They found, pregnant women are on it. So there are all these new demographics. Who's going to get? We have a younger population than Italy, so the model's constantly changing. He's constantly adjusting to this. But I'd give him A++, and I give Deborah Birx an A++ too. I think she's been very transparent. The models evolve, and it surprises us every day at the news conferences how fast things are moving. This onslaught in New York is going to be unbelievable tragedy, and yet they're adapting, and they're keeping a positive face on this. And I think for the present, there will be books written about this, about all the mistakes that were made, why America slept. But I think right now in the present, faced with this enormous tragedy, now is the time that we really have to do as much as we can. I'm 18, 20 hours a day trying to get parts, trying to find ventilators. Today we were actually looking at a very interesting thing, Larry. It turns out that a lot of these patients, when they come into the ER, if they had a very high flow ventilation of oxygen through their nostrils at a high pressure, they may not crash. Because the biggest tragedy is this: people have the disease for maybe 4 or 5 days. They start to get short of breath. They have 8 hours, and then they crash. I mean, their oxygen saturation falls, and if they're not on a ventilator, they die very quickly. And so catching those patients is important. So I just learned yesterday in New York that there are these machines that do that. I had a call into New Zealand where they make some of them, in New Hampshire where they make others, trying to adapt to this. So, it's one of the most fascinating stories of our time. And I think that one thing you're going to see in the United States with the medical excellence, the teams like the CDC and Dr. Fauci and Deborah Birx, is that we're going to adapt very, very quickly. You look at hospitals like Mass General, New York Presbyterian, Dartmouth Hitchcock, that are adapting, they're looking at it. And I think we're going to change the face of this disease. I think we're, really going to win on a lot of these fronts here as long as we can get the equipment and understand a lot more about this disease than we had up until now. So it's going to be fascinating medically, even though, of course, it's an unparalleled tragedy for many.
Do you think that under 200,000 deaths would be a victory?
I think it would. Originally these models looked at 2.7 million deaths. And when you look at the staggering number of infections here, I think it is a victory if you hit 200,000 or even 250,000. I think that the interesting bigger victory is that when we go and look at the background, that is, right now we're doing a test that only shows active infection. There's a company, I think, called BioAmerica that now has a serological test, meaning you take a blood test and using antibodies, you can determine if somebody had the infection. Once we have that background information, if we can get a death rate that's less than 1%, that's 0.6, 0.7%, that'll be a victory.
Dr. Arnot, thank you as always. Stay well.
Thank you, Larry. Great job. Thanks for really being at the forefront of this epidemic, as you have been at the forefront of the news for decades. We all tremendously admire you.